The temperatures outside are rising, and so is the heat on the next fantasy hockey season. That's why you're tapped right back into your daily source for fantasy hockey news. It's the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, and it's time to take a look at what's going on in the nation's capital with these Ottawa Senators. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're about to hit the ice in only 2 months' time, and that's why all of the draft prep for the next fantasy season that you need is already fully underway. What is going on, everybody? And welcome back inside the lab to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Wednesday edition. Shout out to the everydayers holding us down, making us your first listen every single day. We couldn't do the show without y'all, so we see you and appreciate you big time. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The summer is heating up, and FanDuel is hooking up customers all summer long with a boost or daily bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Steele, this Ottawa Senators team has obviously been, I don't want to say a hot topic for you and I, but one in which has definitely been at the forefront of our conversations over the last year or so. And for obvious reasons, I would say some good, lately some not so good. But there are a lot of very intriguing fantasy pieces on this squad. And I know I'll speak for myself, but I think you were on the same train as me last summer at this time. We were really drinking the Senators Kool-Aid as a team that has all the offensive guns in the world to really make some noise in that Atlantic division. And then this season comes out, and I'll just put it out there. I think the goaltending really was their undoing at multiple points of the season. We'll talk about that. But this list for me is loaded with really intriguing players. And I have a guy poised for a breakout. I kind of alluded to it there in the graphic, but we'll talk about him later. What's your take on this Ottawa Senators team? Of course, you and I build in our top 5 fantasy targets on the Ottawa Senators, but you can't help but feel with Ullmark in the fold now, things might be a little bit different for this squad this season.
Yeah, the tandem of Korpisalo and Forsberg was their undoing for sure. They let in more than 20 goals on the first shot of the game very consistently throughout the NHL regular season. So that was definitely their undoing right there, was in the crease. They fixed that with Linus Ullmark, and we're going to talk about his fantasy value coming up. The only Ottawa Senator that I'm 100% sold on right now is Brady Tkachuk. And that's not saying that I don't love what they've got cooking in Ottawa, because there's lots of young talent. There's lots of prospering fantasy value with this team right now. But the only guy that I am 100% sold on, who's been very consistent fantasy value-wise and just for the Ottawa Senators, is Brady Tkachuk. 3 straight consistent years of all peripheral categories banging out for you. He's a banger league beauty. 67 points 3 years ago, 83 points and 74 points this last season, 134 penalty minutes. That's 3 straight seasons of 115 plus penalty minutes for Brady Tkachuk. 3 straight seasons of 240 plus hits. He had 294 this last year as well. It's also 2 straight seasons of 345 plus shots for Brady Tkachuk. He's had 3 straight seasons of over 10% shooting percentage in the NHL at this point. He's your absolute dream for peripheral categories and categorical leagues. He fills out everything. Penalty minutes, blocks is obviously not part of his game, but the hits, the shots, the points. He's been 3 straight seasons now with 30 plus goals. He's an absolute savant. He's a juggernaut that does everything the Ottawa Senators need him to do. And that's why he's the captain of this team. And that's why he's going to lead them going into next year. And I'm going to actually, once again, say that the Ottawa Senators are going to be a playoff team as well. Now with Linus Ullmark in the mix, I think he's going to be undervalued and overlooked a lot going in next year fantasy-wise. I think maybe, obviously, you don't want to reach on him, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for me, Brady Tkachuk is the number 1 guy that you're going to be targeting off the Ottawa Senators. He's a first-round draft pick. Maybe if you're in an 8-team league, he falls into the early second round, but I'm snagging Brady Tkachuk at least from anywhere from 10 to 12 to 14. He's that good. He does everything you need him to do, and that's why he's number 1 on my list.
Obviously, a slight dip in point production, 83 down to 74, but I think that's just kind of what happens when the team overall struggles a little bit. It was a
100%.
frustrating season for this Ottawa Senators team, and you could see it on the face of Brady Tkachuk night in and night out. This guy wants to win. He is a gamer. He is the prototypical leader on and off the ice. The Sens have themselves a real good one with this one, and he is definitely locked in at the number one spot in terms of fantasy options here, Steele. I think if either of us came out here and said something different, that's when we have to check ourselves, because you made all the points that need to be made, the peripheral categories. He throws his weight around. He's a stud. However, I will say, I'm a little bit more confident in Timmy Stutz than maybe you are, because I know, again, down season last year, and I think this is maybe just, my personal opinion, because I don't know if you remember, but I made that prediction of a 90-point plus season 2 years ago, and that one actually panned out with 90 on the button. However, maybe he falls somewhere in between 70 and 90 points in terms of my expectations for how good he is offensively. Obviously, 100 hits, some else to like there, 28 penalty minutes. Fantasy-wise, there's tons to still like about Timmy Stutz, but when we talk about him on the ice, he's got to tighten up his all-around game. He's only 22 years old. We see him making some really poor decision-making. He's a bit of a flopper. He's a bit of a diver, and that's not me creating this narrative. Watch him play. He's a little loosey-goosey, but I think he's going to tighten it up this year, Steele, along with the rest of this team. So let me spit it out. He is at number 2 for me. I think, in my opinion, that is clear, maybe just based on overall potential. Because last year, 20 points less. He's minus 17. All of those things are hurting his fantasy value. If you put it all together, though, Ullmark in there, a new coach, some winds of change, you can't help but feel that the numbers for these guys, especially Timmy Stutz, I think he's going to have a bounce back year. That's just me, Steele. But let me just point out this, and this is not to make excuses for this Ottawa Senators team. They had a little bit of everything go against them last year, from suspensions to draft penalties for what Dorian was doing. Then Dorian gets canned. There's the off-ice stuff with the ownership. Just throwing it out there. You can't help but feel that last year was a bit doomed for this team. And I think that means overall, Steele, your point about Ullmark perhaps being overlooked because of how much of a down year the Sens had, I think you're right on the money with that one. We'll talk about Ullmark, but in terms of this team improving, I think that's going to mean great things for all of the players we talk about today. Do they all have more points, more value? I think that might be bold, but I think right now that's headed in that direction.
It is heading in that direction. And again, I really do feel Linus Ullmark's going to be undervalued and overlooked going into next year's fantasy draft. And that's going to be a goaltender I really target for my fantasy team later in the draft, mid to late rounds. For sure.
Like,
but hey, maybe there's a lot of people out there not overlooking him and he gets taken. I'll talk about Tim Stützle after the break once we come back and finish off with the rest of this top 5 fantasy assets for the Ottawa Senators. But Linus Ullmark, he's going to be one of them for sure.
Most definitely. I got a breakout candidate. I got a sleeper candidate. The winds of change are blowing through the nation's capital. New coach, new ownership. Stevie Stais now fully entrenched at the helm. He's got a bunch of time under his belt now. I don't know how I feel about David Perron. I don't know how I feel about that Jensen for Chychrun swap. We'll talk about that after the break. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Steele and I love sports. We love them so much. We never want them to stop. The playoffs are long done, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today's YouTube channel. Make it your second listen after this podcast. They're here for you 24/7, bringing the top and biggest stories without all the screaming from Fox Sports or ESPN. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. The team that we talk about on today's Wednesday's episode are the Ottawa Senators. And to continue the conversation about Tim Stützle, I would have to agree with you because he is the second guy on my list as well. And obviously, a regression season from 90 to 70 points. Look, he lost his scoring touch last year. It seems like a fluke. I don't expect him to go back to a 18 goal season once again after scoring 39 the year prior. Yes. Also take into consideration, he only had one power play goal. He had 10 the year prior to that. He was awful on the power play. Again,
the team was awful on the power play.
The team was awful on the power play. He was more of a playmaker last year anyway, and he's been more of a playmaker throughout his career in professional hockey, but he still has that scoring touch. He's a great goal scorer when he hits the net. And I think that's what was a big problem with him last year is he wasn't hitting the net enough. He shot the puck a little bit less as well. I'm loving the physicality that he brings. 3 straight seasons of 100 plus hits in the NHL. I expect him to be in that 70 to 90 point range. Exactly what you said. In the middle of that is where I would see him fall. And that brings up his fantasy value from last year, because last year he actually finished 117th at the end of the regular season in fantasy rankings. I expect him to be a lot higher than that.
Me too.
I think there are going to be a lot of GMs that potentially reach on Timmy Stützle, and I really don't see it being a problem with everything going for the Ottawa Senators in this right direction now. But for me, Timmy Stützle, he's going to fall somewhere, honestly, somewhere in that 5th to 6th round area. I just think there's a lot more upside to more players out there fantasy wise in the NHL. But Timmy Stützle is going to be the second Ottawa Senator off the board. Number 3, I know you have to have Drake Batherson at number 3. So I'll let you know. Yeah, I know you got Drake Batherson.
You know how I feel about Drake Batherson.
I'll let you do your spiel on Drake Batherson, then I'll come back right after. But Batherson is also a guy to continue to watch and keep your eye on for.
So you can put him in the Seth Jarvis group. You can put him in the Thomas Harley group. You can put him along with all those other guys, Steele, that I like to talk about on the regular. But it's also because, and you know this, I own this guy in my Keeper Dynasty League. I've been on him since he was coming out of junior. And I know maybe, I think he's just been kind of slowly progressing nicely. You go from 34 points to 44 points, 62 points, and then last year, 66. Maybe we were expecting a little bit more of a jump, but I'll say it now in July. That happens this season. This guy has all the tools to be an elite forward in the NHL. I am high on this guy, but Steele, I'm saying 75 points this year is what I'm expecting from Drake Batherson. He's got the size. He's got the skating ability. He can do a little bit of everything. 98 hits as well, Steele. 33 block shots, 42 penalty minutes, 196 shots on net, though down from 249 the year before. You know what I'm going to say? If he returns to 250 plus shots, 70 or 75 points is no problem, especially when you factor in all the other things that we're expecting this team to improve on. And I'll give it away now. Drake Batherson is my breakout candidate. So if I'm going really hard in the paint here, I'd say 80 points for Drake Batherson. I don't want to make myself look completely ridiculous. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, Steele. He played back-to-back full 82-game seasons. He's a durable player. Lots to love about Drake Batherson at both ends of the ice. He throws his body around. He was a late 4th-round draft pick, I believe, Steele. So he's doing very well for himself. And let me just leave it at this. I mentioned the power play for this team last year. They finished 23rd in the league on a power play, only clicking at 18%, not nearly good enough. And the penalty kill was even worse. Only the Minnesota Wild, Anaheim Ducks, and New York Islanders killed penalties at a worse percentage, 75%. If you're letting the opposition score 1 every 4 times on the power play and your goaltending is letting you down how they did, it's not really surprising that the Ottawa Senators only outpaced the worst team in the division, the Montreal Canadiens, by 2 points. However, Drake Batherson's number 3 for sure. And I'll say it now, Steele, in these other leagues, in our listener league, I'm going to be going after Drake Batherson hot and heavy because I'm pegging him as a breakout candidate for this season. Hit me with your take on all that.
Batherson also at number 3 for me. He's right there, a few spots behind Timmy Stützle. I could see Batherson getting taken right after him, honestly, somewhere in the 6th to 7th round. I could see even dropping all the way to the 8th round as well. But there's so much young talent with this Ottawa Senators team. I see them once again being a playoff team. I know they weren't last year, but the undoing of the goaltenders between Korpisalo and Forsberg really hurt them. Like they were a playoff team if they got some decent goaltending, and they couldn't get that with that tandem. So I mean, we all know what they've got cooking offensively. I'm going to talk
Yes.
about a breakout player as well.
Oh.
And I'm very perplexed about where to put him because I want him to be in the top 5, but I just don't know when I've got Claude Giroux and Linus Ullmark also sitting
me
there.
too.
So
Me
I've
too.
got Claude Giroux at number 4. Obviously, I got Batherson at number 3. I've got Claude Giroux at number 4 because he still has the touch. He still has the touch at his veteran presence at his age right now. 37 years old or 36 years old, will be 37 in January. So Claude Giroux for me comes in at number 4. He's been very consistent in the 2 years he's been in Ottawa now. 79 points the year prior. Again, another dip in the offensive production, went from 79 to 64, but that happened to all the players in the offensive zone for the Ottawa Senators. 64 points. He's a playmaker. He had 16 power play assists. Let me just get this up. 183 shots. The peripherals are pretty solid for Claude Giroux. He's going to be playing on that top line once again with Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk. That's also why I have him at number 4 instead of another person, another player. He's also going to be playing top power play unit alongside those guys. And again, hopefully the power play gets a lot better than what we saw last year. But Claude Giroux, fantasy wise, he's going to be a sneaky pickup for any fantasy GM that gets him. I could easily see him falling down to the 14th or 15th round, and that's going to be a solid sneaky pick if anybody gets him there.
I think that actually, even though I'm going to disagree and have Ullmark there at 4, I think if he falls that far, that's a huge slip because he definitely still has all the offensive hands in the world. Also, though, right now, daily faceoffs actually pegging him to be playing on the second power play unit. Sanderson, Norris, Batherson, Stützle, and Tkachuk on the first. That could obviously change. He has all the skills in the world to be on the top power play.
Josh Norris.
Big question mark
Big
for sure.
question mark.
That's something I want to talk to you about after the break. Let me just reel off this 1 second because obviously I got Giroux at 5, Ullmark at 4. So let's talk about Ullmark after the break. I really do think, though, Steele, there's a couple of sneaky good players here. Last year, we expected Jake Sanderson to take a step forward. He did not. Maybe he does that this year. You know, there's also some intriguing names that I was going to throw out in Shane Pinto's name that maybe we'll talk about that after the break as well. However,
100%.
They bring in Michael Amadio. They bring in David Perron. They bring in, I think also it's Nick Jensen. Those are the 3 most notable aside from Linus Ullmark. What was your feeling on the Chychrun move? Let's just leave it at this and then we'll get to break. But Jensen for Chychrun, it seems like it was a need for his handed of shot, but Jacob Chychrun, I know, has been a very polarizing fantasy piece, but you can't help but feel overall for the Sens, that might be one of the downgrades and one of the concerns I have about this team. It's definitely the blue line.
I mean, they also get that 3rd round pick, if I remember correctly, in that trade for Nick Jensen. And maybe it is for the right-hand shot. But look, Jacob Chychrun was an absolute liability in the defensive zone. I went multiple times last season at different stages of the second half of the season saying exactly what he was producing, what he wasn't doing as well. I mean, his penalty minutes were higher than his points. He was a defensive liability. He wasn't working. He wasn't working for what the
How many times are we going to say that guy needs to change his scenery before?
Yeah, and we say that a lot with a few players. Chychrun being one of them, Pierre-Luc Dubois being one of them, Patrick Laine being one of them. These guys just cannot seem to fit in anywhere they go. Hopefully, Jacob Chychrun's going to be a lot better in Washington. But, I mean, I'm fine with the trade. I mean, it is what it is at this point. They get a right shot defenseman in Nick Jensen, who's, I mean, he's not fantasy relevant, but I mean, he's a pretty decent defenseman when things are all said and done. So fantasy wise, Nick Jensen's not going to be that relevant. Maybe you pick him up here and there when the Ottawa Senators have a good
for
week
some block shots.
For some block shots, it chips in with points every now and again, but I'm not really looking at anybody that the Ottawa Senators picked up. I'm looking at the guys they had last year, as well as Linus Ullmark, who we'll talk right after the break. So much to discuss with this Ottawa Senators team. Breakout candidates all coming up next. But first, this episode is also brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to the Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent survey. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed from this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us Monday through Friday. We're going to show some support, continuing with the Ottawa Senators, about Linus Ullmark. He comes in at number 5. I know he's at number 4 for you, but he's 5th on my list. And it's really him being at number 5 just because he's not with the Boston Bruins anymore. He is now with the Ottawa Senators. I take that with a grain of salt, obviously, but it's not the same team. It's not the same culture. It's just a different atmosphere all around. And he doesn't have the bodies in front of him like he did in Boston. So that's why he comes in at number 5. But I think there's still a ton of fantasy value with Linus Ullmark. Obviously, I've been very heavy and very hot on this player for many recent years. I mean, I was talking about his days with the Buffalo Sabres. He still had some really good seasons with them, even though they were a bad team. And I think this is going to make a huge difference for the Senators moving forward, having him as the number 1 starting goaltender who you can actually have confidence in, depend on to make the first save of the game, like they weren't able to have last year with Korpisalo and Forsberg. So I know Ullmark is at 4 for you. He comes in at 5 for me just for those reasons, but also, again, I mean, obviously the Bruins had that historic season where they broke
2 of them,
the
really,
NHL
2
history,
good ones.
2 of them. But he also went from 40 wins to 22 wins. He was 46-1 the year prior. He was 22-10-7 last year. He had a .915 save percentage with a 2.57 goals against average.
He started 10
really,
less
really
games,
good.
though, because of swing.
And he did start. And again, that's another reason as well. So he's going to be probably getting a lot more games started in him with the Ottawa Senators. He comes in at number 5 for me. Flip, though, I know you want to talk about a breakout player or potential breakout players. I've got one for sure, but I want to hear who you're looking at for the Ottawa Senators.
So breakout was Drake Batherson, but I got 2 sleepers, and both of them I think we've talked about on this show. Shane Pinto, to me, is a guy that has a lot of fantasy value depending on how he's deployed for the upcoming season, and right now it's hard to say. It looks like he should be slotted up as the number 2 center. Playing with Drake Batherson, probably getting a good look on the power play 2 time. So Shane Pinto, for me, now he's got the contract secured. He's learned his lesson with all this gambling madness. Last year was obvious. He came back and he was one of their best players, if not their best, at a couple of points there. So I'm looking at Shane Pinto as a really, really good sleeper option. I like his shot. I really like his moxie as an NHLer. He's got all the tools to do it. And honestly, Steele, not to sound like a broken record, but if everything does start to point in the direction that we expect it to in Ottawa, guys like Pinto, guys even like Ridley Gregg are really going to start to blossom. And I know Ridley Gregg's a whole different conversation, and I'm looking at Shane Pinto, but the point holds true. And I think at the end of training camp, when we have a little bit of a better idea of what these line rushes look like, what is Josh Norris going to look like, I'll feel a lot more confident with our predictions, but we'll run it all back in September, baby. The prep don't stop.
Look, Shane Pinto was the player that I wanted to have in the top 5. I think he's going to be outstanding this next year for the Ottawa Senators. That second line center position is clearly his, in my opinion. I don't think it's going to anybody else. No. And again, just looking at what he did last year in half a season, I mean, he was on pace for 54 points. He was on pace for over 200 shots. He was on pace for 80 hits and 62 blocks. The power play, he's going to get some second power play time as well. Maybe he gets some first power play time depending on injuries. Again, knock on wood for Josh Norris, but you never know what's going on with Josh Norris's shoulders these days. But Shane Pinto is going to be a breakout player. He's going to have an exciting and fantastic season with the Ottawa Senators. He's on my list. I hope everyone else is sleeping on him because I'm not right now. I expect big things from Shane Pinto. I expect a lot of things from this entire top 6 forward group. of the Ottawa Senators. So he's my breakout player. I know. Let's quickly just mention Jake Sanderson, because we both like what he brings to the table as well for the Ottawa Senators. I think Jake Sanderson is the number one. We have most of the top fives. We've had at least one defenseman in there as a fantasy target in the top five. We didn't have one on this Ottawa Senators top 5 fantasy assets list. Jake Sanderson just misses out. He's in that 6 to 7 position. Again, I wanted Shane Pinto in there, but he just couldn't make it, obviously, for obvious reasons. But Jake Sanderson, I think he's going to be a whole lot better than Thomas Chabot. I think he's going to get a lot more deployment than Thomas Chabot. There's a lot to worry with Chabot because of injury concerns. He has not been a healthy player for this Ottawa Senators team for many, many years now. And I'm just bringing up his statistics right now. I mean, he played 51 games. He had 30 points. The year prior, he had 68 games played with 41 points. He's been a perennial 30 to 40 point for his entire career with the Ottawa Senators, and he just continues to deal with significant injuries every single season that keeps him out of the lineup. Jake Sanderson, I mean, there is a little bit of room for growth with this player. I mean, size-wise, he is 6'3", he is 195 pounds, but I mean, still a pretty decent size for a defenseman, but there's still room for him to grow at such a young age. 22 years old still. So I like Jake Sanderson a lot more than Thomas Chabot. I would be drafting Sanderson over Chabot in most categories, in most leagues.
Yeah, that's fair, actually. And I was actually super high on Thomas Chabot even a couple of years ago. And I think Chabot, the hockey player, and what he can bring to the table when he is healthy, very fantasy relevant. And I might be taking him over Jake Sanderson. But I'm with you in terms of this come up. Goes in the same vein with everything else. Just to wrap up my point on Pinto, really like this kid's shot, too. He plays both ends of the ice well. So wholeheartedly agree with you on Pinto. Not as confident in Jake Sanderson as you are, but I'm not going to disagree. And make sure if you're out there, we had the league-wide breakdown run-in Steele. Just want to ream off who you've missed. Habs, Stars, Kraken, Bolts, Avs, and Islanders, all already covered. We're going to roll through the rest of the NHL all summer long until we're done. And then we got to be hitting our top positional lists. All of the sleepers and keepers you need. Ooh, baby, Steele. It's about to get real serious up in here.
About 23, 24 teams in the NHL to go on this podcast, and we'll break it all down throughout the summer. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today. Once again, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app. They're here for you 24/7, bringing the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering every single league. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day out there. Good luck with all your summer bets, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Go Leafs, go.